Imagine yourself lying still, eyes closed, listening to the gentle rhythm of waves that rise and fall like breathing. Within that soft sound of water meeting the shore lies something far older than the sand, deeper than the ocean itself. A primordial world once breathed beneath its surface, a world unrecorded by history, swallowed by the tides long before any human gave the sea its name. As you quiet your mind and let the sound of water wrap around your thoughts, imagine yourself descending slowly into that depth. The light above begins to fade, yet a faint glimmer still seeps through the currents, brushing across massive stones that stand like keepers of time at the ocean floor. There is no sound but the slow turning of the currents, and in that silence, it feels as if every bubble carries a forgotten story. Each time the water swirls around you, you might imagine the remnants of towering walls covered in coral, the ruins of spires now home to drifting fish, and amid it all, a living silence. No ruin is ever truly quiet. Every stone that shifts, every strand of seaweed that sways, seems to whisper of a time when this underwater world was land touched by sunlight. There, cities once stood, their streets now buried beneath shifting sand. Those cities were not built by human hands as we know them today. They may have known a different shape of time, a length of day not like ours, and a sunlight softer than what we see now. Perhaps they saw the sea not as a boundary, but as a mirror of the ancient sky vast, full of signs. Maybe everything began their civilization born from water, living with water, and in the end, returned to it. Now let my mind and yours sink deeper. There is no hurry, for time moves differently in the depths. Down here, everything slows, as though the world is remembering itself. You need not look for answers, just listen, because every layer of water holds echoes older than any language ever spoken. About 12,000 years ago, when the last sheets of ice began to melt and the seas slowly rose to swallow the low valleys, there was an age that now exists only as a shadow in the memory of the earth. The oceans we know today were once vast plains, crossed by colossal rivers and shimmering lakes beneath an ancient sun. The lines of those forgotten shores now sleep under the waves, buried in mud and time. Many scholars call it an age of transition, when the world changed its shape for the final time before becoming what we recognize today. Yet beneath shifting layers of stone and sand, there are traces of life older than anyone once imagined. Stones on the seafloor west of India, in the Caribbean, and near Japan carry patterns too deliberate to be chance. The blocks lie as if once part of roads that no longer lead anywhere, pillars that no longer hold, and walls draped in sea moss, resisting erasure. Divers who have descended into those depths often speak of a strange feeling of being surrounded by something that once lived, something still watching from the dark. There is no proof, only a sensation too strong to dismiss. At some forgotten point in the planet's history, civilization may have risen, only to be erased by a great wave that came without warning. The sea keeps no archives, it only swallows and softens its edges. Yet sometimes it returns fragments of memory, carved stones found off Yanaguni's coast, or geometric patterns buried beneath the Gulf of Kamhat in India, where shapes too perfect to be natural rise from the silt. If cities truly stood beneath the sea, then the ocean was not humanity's enemy, but its silent tomb. Imagine their final evening before the water claimed them. Perhaps an orange sky fading to gray, seabirds circling above. People running between stone streets holding torches whose flames flickered against the salt wind. No one knows if they understood what was coming. Perhaps there was no time to run. Perhaps the water came slowly, like thickening mist, before sweeping all away. Their world did not vanish in chaos. It sank quietly, like someone falling asleep and never waking again. Now we can only guess what it looked like. Did they know writing, or did they speak only through symbols carved in stone? Did they know gods, or did they speak to the sea as to an old friend? Nothing is certain except one thing. In the depths, time does not pass as it does on land. Everything there is preserved not by intention, but by accident, by pressure that both protects and destroys. And that is where this story begins, from a world that sank, but never truly died. At that time, the world's coastlines were unrecognizable compared to today. Where the North Sea now lies, there once stretched a wide green valley with great rivers winding between low hills. Wild beasts roamed its meadows, mammoths, wild horses, and herds of deer crossing land bridges long since drowned by waves. Winter winds carried the scent of wet earth and frozen grass, while far on the horizon, the sky hung low and copper-colored. The world felt quieter, yet more alive. No engines, no cities, only the hum of the wind and the rumble of thunder from ancient, nameless storms. Amid that landscape, humans or something very much like them may have built their settlements. Not all lived in caves, as our textbooks suggest. Some regions show signs of managed waterways, stone foundations laid with precision, and drainage systems too deliberate to be natural. If this is true, then the history we know is merely a fragment of a much older story, and our modern world only the final chapter of a script that began long before Mesopotamia or Egypt. Beneath the waters off Japan, divers have found vast stone terraces with stairways leading to a flat-topped pyramid. Off the coast of western India, sonar has revealed long rectangular shapes like ancient roads. In the Caribbean, circular stone patterns lie buried under sea sand. All share one haunting trait. They rest at depths reachable only if the sea rose suddenly. As if the world once sank in a single endless night. Yet that ancient world may not have been merely a home to primitive humans struggling to survive. Perhaps there were cities built upon stone, adorned with symbols no one can now read. Perhaps they understood the stars, speaking to the night sky and recording its movements on polished rock surfaces now swallowed by silt. And if they truly existed, then the sea that drowned them also became their eternal guardian, the keeper of the last secret of the earth. A guardian that never sleeps. No one knows exactly when the sea began to rise, for no eyes remained to witness its beginning. Yet from geological records and layers of sediment, stacked like pages of an ancient book, we can read a slow story, almost imperceptible. At first, the weather changed. The sky that once shone pale blue turned gray. Clouds hung for weeks, and rain fell endlessly. Rivers overflowed, marshes expanded, and once fertile lands became cold mud. In the highlands, winds grew stronger, as if the earth itself exhaled a long breath before swallowing its own surface. Some regions began to lose their shape. The sturdy coastlines eroded little by little. Small islands vanished without a sound, leaving only ripples spreading slowly across the water. Animals migrated, fleeing valleys now half submerged. While ancient humans who may have built their cities by the sea might have looked upon the horizon with an unfamiliar dread. Unable to grasp that their world was changing forever, mountains trembled, and from the ocean floor, vast bubbles rose, accompanied by a deep rumble echoing onto the land. It was as if the earth reopened an old wound, releasing heat and pressure from its buried core. Modern scientists call it tectonic upheaval, a natural shift that reshaped continents. Yet in older imagination, many believed the sea was not simply rising, it was reclaiming what had always been its own. There are stories whispered among ancient coastal people's tales of a song heard from the sea on the night before the waters swallowed the shore. The voice was soft and distant, as if calling from another world. No one knew whether it was fear playing tricks on the mind or a true calling from the city about to vanish. When dawn arrived, the song was gone, and in its place lay only a glittering expanse of water beneath the first light of the sun. From that moment on, the sea grew deeper, and the line between land and water blurred. The world lost much of its memory, consumed by the ceaseless movement of waves. What remained were fragments of stone, nameless artifacts, and a long silence still waiting beneath the deep ocean for someone brave enough to listen. Beneath the sky slowly losing its color, the last cities at the edge of the world began to show signs of fatigue. The stone walls that once stood proudly now bore fine cracks, breathing in rhythm with the trembling earth. The streets that once echoed with voices now lay empty, marked only by footprints fading in the wet mud. In the harbor, wooden ships hung loosely from their moorings, half submerged, while the sea crept higher each night, quiet and patient. There was no war, no sudden disaster, only change, arriving with the patience of death, walking without footsteps. The people must have sensed the end approaching. They watched the nearing sea with a mix of fear and surrender. Some still tried to resist reinforcing walls, diverting water, piling sand, but their efforts were no more than small rituals against a force far older than themselves. Some fled inland, carrying children and a few tools, while others stayed, believing the sea was part of life, not an enemy. At the city's heart stood a great temple, defying the tide. Its pillars remained upright, and within, the sacred fire still burned despite the damp and salt-laden air. Guardians watched over the flame night and day, certain that as long as it lived, their world would not fully vanish. Yet slowly, the salt mist began to creep inside, clinging to the walls, dripping from the ceiling. At night, the fire flickered, as if afraid of the growing roar of waves outside. Some accounts, if they ever truly existed, say that on the final day before the temple drowned, the sky turned silvery. Rain fell gently like ash, and the sea's surface shimmered softly as if lit from below. Those who remained gathered in the square, listening to faint sounds in the distance, perhaps the collapse of the southern district, or perhaps something else, something not born of their world. Then came the last night. The waves reached the temple steps, washing the feet of stone statues that had stood for millennia. Water seeped into homes, lifting furniture, erasing the prints of human life. There were no screams, no desperate escape. That ancient world sank in deep silence, accepting its fate with open eyes. When dawn came again, only the calm surface of the sea remained, reflecting the pale light of the sun as if the city had never been. Before the sea swallowed everything, life in that ancient city moved slowly, like an old song repeating without end. Morning arrived gently, its light slipping through the stone towers and moss-lined gardens. People opened their stone windows and let the salty air drift inside. Footsteps echoed on the cobblestone streets, not crowded, just the quiet rhythm of a life too familiar with eternity. They believed the world would never change, that the sun would always rise from the same direction, and the sea would always stop where the gods had once decided. In the lower market, women carried woven baskets filled with salt and dried fish, while children ran along the canals, throwing pebbles into the shimmering water. In the distance, an old man sat beneath a tree with a clay bowl, reading inscriptions that were nearly erased. He didn't know what they meant, only that he must recite them each morning to keep the world in balance. At the Western Temple, guards stood beneath massive gates with expressionless faces, holding spears rusted at their tips. They inspired no fear, for there was nothing left to fear. At night, the city was lit by stone lanterns fueled with seaweed oil. Their trembling light lined the main road, casting pale yellow reflections across walls now softened by moss. Inside homes, people ate in silence. They didn't talk much about the future, because the future felt too far to reach. Time did not move there. It circled quietly around the same day, repeating endlessly like the waves that struck the shore and returned with nothing. Some believed their city was built upon something far older. Sometimes, when they dug the ground to repair water channels, they found strange stones, too smooth, too large to be shaped by human hands. Some said they were remnants of a civilization before theirs, a sea people who once lived beneath the waves and vanished when the world was still young. But no one truly cared. Such tales were bedtime stories for children who wanted to dream of other worlds. On certain days, the air grew heavier, more humid than usual. The scent of the ocean deepened, as if something was waiting to arrive. Seabirds flew low, circling above the temple roofs. Fishermen said the current had shifted. The fish had gone elsewhere. Still, the city carried on in its own calm rhythm. Someone played a flute by the harbor, its melody swallowed by the wind. In the distance, someone lit an extra lantern atop the tallest tower. They didn't know why, only that the night seemed to need a little more light. The next morning arrived with an unusual stillness. The sea looked too calm, its surface reflecting the sky like an unbroken mirror. The air felt heavier, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The fishermen who usually left before dawn stood by the pier, staring at the motionless water. A seabird fell silently between the boats, its feathers wet, eyes open wide. In the market, the fish sold the night before remained fresh, as though newly caught, even without salt. No one understood what it meant, but everyone felt the same, any something coming from the sea, watching them back. The main temple declared an additional ritual. something not performed for generations. The oldest priest spoke in a low voice, reciting names even the guards did not recognize. The offering stones were scrubbed clean, and the old statues long covered with cloth were uncovered again. Their faces did not resemble humans. They looked more like sea creatures with wide eyes and long jaws. Some who saw them turned away immediately, unable to stare for long. No one knew why the temple called upon the forgotten gods again. Yet that night, when the wind shifted, everyone woke to a deep, resonant sound, like a long breath escaping from the belly of the sea. Beneath the water, something moved slowly. Massive stones long buried began to tremble, shifting inch by inch. From the cracks in the reefs rose great bubbles that reached the surface and burst into pale circles on the water. Some fishermen, brave enough to look below with torches, saw something glinting on the seabed, metallic perhaps, yet far too vast to be a ship. They returned to shore without a word. That night, the city's salt-scented air grew sharper, as if something had opened deep below, something that should have remained asleep. The next day, children playing on the beach found fragments of stone unlike any they'd seen before. They were bluish, unusually heavy, etched with spiral marks like letters from an unknown tongue. Some elders warned the children to return them to the sea, but they didn't listen. They kept the pieces at home, treating them as gifts from the ocean. That night, the children dreamed of a voice rising from the water, calling their names one by one in a deep, steady tone. In the city's center, the bronze bell in the main tower rang 3 times without being touched. Its vibration sent seabirds scattering in panic. People stepped out of their houses, staring toward the shore. The western sky looked darker than usual, and on the horizon pulsed a faint light, beating slowly like the heart of something enormous. No one knew whether it was an omen or merely a trick of the air. Yet that night, no one slept. Everyone waited, sensing that something ancient, something that should have remained buried, had begun to open its eyes once more. The following days passed like a dream, slowly rotting. The sea was no longer blue. It turned a dull green-gray, like rusted metal. The waves no longer rolled. They rose sluggishly and fell flat with a heavy sound. On the beach, the sand felt colder, as though it carried the memory of something ancient. Some fishermen reported that the fish now swam in strange circles, as if avoiding something massive in the deep. A small whale washed ashore near the town, but when people approached, its body did not decay like ordinary flesh. Its skin had turned to stone, and on its chest was a spiral carving that glowed faintly when night came. The ground near the shore began to crack with thin lines that crept toward the city. From the fissures rose white vapor, smelling of salt and iron. The townsfolk tried to cover them with dirt, but each morning the cracks reopened wider than before. Houses near the harbor began to lean. Every night, sounds came from beneath the ground, sometimes distant footsteps, sometimes heavy breathing beneath the crust of the earth. The priests said it was not a living thing, but an echo of something slowly rising, something that had slept since before the world had names. Even the sky began to change. Clouds moved in patterns that defied weather. Sometimes they circled above a single point for hours, then vanished without wind. At night, the stars hung lower, as if suspended closer to the earth. Among them appeared a new light knot twinkling, but pulsing gently, in rhythm with the sound now rising from the sea. People spoke in whispers, afraid to say the city's name aloud, as if a single word could summon what was waiting in the dark water. The main temple grew busier. Every night, incense smoke curled endlessly upward. The oldest priest was rarely seen, and the inner doors of the temple were always locked. Those who cleaned the courtyard claimed to hear voices from within, not human voices, but wet and heavy ones, speaking in a language they couldn't understand. On the third night, a guard was found at the temple door, eyes wide open, his face shriveled as if dried by a salt wind. In his hand, he clutched a small blue stone that glowed faintly in the dark. After that night, the city seemed to understand without speaking. Something had truly awakened. The sea was no longer just the sea. It had become an eye-watching, waiting, calling. And in every house, especially those facing the shore, people nailed boards over their windows despite the heat. They no longer wished to see the sky's reflection on the water, for on certain nights, what appeared there was not the sky at all, but faces from the depths staring back, smiling too calmly to be human. The next morning arrived late. The sun did not rise from its usual place. It emerged from the wrong side of the sea, and its light was dimmer, like a lamp burning behind murky glass. The shadows of buildings stretched in strange directions, as though the earth itself had turned slightly slower than before. People didn't notice at first, until the clocks in the temple tower began showing hours that didn't match the brightness of the sky. The bell, which was meant to toll 12 times to mark morning, struck only 7 before stopping abruptly. No one dared climb the tower to check, for from within came a trembling sound like breathing too close to be human. That day became the first when someone truly disappeared. A potter named Oren, who lived on the eastern side of the city, never returned from his walk to the shore. His wife found him at home, yet his body was neither alive nor dead. It was a shadow clinging to the wall, moving faintly with a light but untouchable. Each time the sun shifted slightly, the shadow moved too, as if trying to walk away, but trapped on the stone surface. The priest who came to see only bowed his head and murmured that the sea had begun reclaiming what once belonged to it. No one understood what he meant, but a chill passed through everyone who heard. At the market, people began noticing that time no longer followed any proper order. Someone could leave home in the morning and return to find dusk turn to night, even though the sun still hung in the sky. Children cried because they could not sleep. Each time they closed their eyes, they heard dripping water in places that should have been dry. A horse near the harbor refused to eat for 3 days and finally leaped into the sea, eyes wide open. Its body was never found. Meanwhile, the remaining priests began to lose their sense of reality. They whispered to one another in fragmented tones, uttering names that did not belong to any human language. The incense that once smelled sweet now stung the air like burning sulfur. One of them wrote on the temple wall with his own blood, "Time is folding, not flowing." No one understood the sentence. But all felt something similar. Days now seemed like repetitions of something they had already lived. slightly altered each time, as if the world were trying to correct tiny mistakes in its own memory. The sea grew darker every evening. Light from the depths pulsed stronger, shining through the waves like a vast, patient blue heartbeat. Sometimes a sound rose from below, a roar or a call, but a kind of song too slow to be called music. Those who listened long enough began to forget small things, their children's names, the location of their homes, even the meanings of the words they spoke. In their confusion, some began walking toward the shore without reason, like people summoned by an unseen voice. When they stepped into the water, they did not scream or look back. They simply walked on until the waves closed over them, leaving the surface calmer than before. On the fourth day after the sky changed color, something stranger occurred. Sound began to vanish from the city. Not all at once, but gradually, like dust swept away by wind. The birds fell silent first. Then the market's noise dwindled into whispers indistinguishable between conversation and prayer. Even the sound of waves, the constant background of life by the shore, disappeared without warning. People spoke, but their voices seemed absorbed by the air, leaving only the motion of lips and anxious eyes. The only sound left came from the sea-low, endless hum, vibrating through the chest, but inaudible to the ear. Some thought it an illusion, born of exhaustion or fear. Yet a child pointed to the water and showed that the bubbles rising to the surface moved in rhythm with the hum, as if the ocean were breathing. Every time the sound paused for a heartbeat, everyone felt their chests tighten. Someone wrote in the sand with charcoal, "The sea is speaking." No one replied, but all began to understand that the silence blanketing the city was no accident. Inside the houses, things stopped behaving normally. Bells didn't ring even when struck. Doors closed without sound. And the flame in the lamps flickered as if disturbed by something unseen. A dog barked voicelessly until blood spilled from its mouth, then collapsed. In that stillness, people felt something deeper than fear, the sense that the world itself was taking a long breath, holding everything between two beats of time. No one knew when it would exhale again. At the harbor, boats tied to the docks swayed gently despite the calm sea. The light from the depths still appeared each night, now shifting to a golden-green hue. If one stared long enough, faint shapes appeared beneath the water-like towers or pillars rising from the seafloor. Some fishermen who stared too long began gesturing in strange patterns, imitating something they had seen below. When they came to, they remembered nothing except a single sentence: "They have not finished building." Night became the hardest time. There was no wind, no insect song, only the dark sky with stars that looked larger and closer, as if listening. The sound from the sea turned into a frequency only some could hear. To those who could, it resembled murmuring forming patterns. Someone transcribed it onto a wooden board and realized it was in T-random. It was a language following the rhythm of the tides. Every 2 hours, the sea seemed to speak a new sentence. No one knew its meaning but an old woman, once the keeper of the temple tower, whispered softly, "It is not human speech. It is the memory of the earth before we were born." People began to share the same dream. In it, They were in another city beneath the same sea, walking among structures that glowed from within. They didn't feel drowned or breathless. They only heard a gentle voice guiding them through streets paved with blue stone. When they awoke, they found fine sand under their nails and the scent of salt on their skin, as though they had truly returned from the deep. On the seventh day, the city was completely silent. No birds, no market, no children's laughter. Only one thing remained: the soft, low voice of the sea that never ceased resonating in every chest, as if the world itself were reminding them that life on land was merely a brief pause in something far older and deeper. In the days that followed, the sea began to change its nature. The once gentle waves now brought strange objects ashore. It's as if the ocean were vomiting the contents of its stomach after keeping them too long. Those living by the coast found black stones glistening softly under the twilight, pulsing gently like the heart of a living creature. When touched, they felt warm and faintly alive. An old fisherman tried to shatter one with a hammer, but every strike only made the vibrations stronger until the air itself seemed to tremble. At last, the stone cracked silently, and from within it escaped a metallic mist that vanished almost instantly, leaving no trace behind. Not long after, small statues began to appear. Their forms resembled neither humans nor animals, completely something in between. Some had human bodies, but heads like fish or seabirds. Their surfaces were smooth like glass, and faint engravings could still be seen, resembling symbols unknown to anyone. Under moonlight, those markings glowed faintly, as if reading something written in the air. The children who watched believed the statues were breathing, for a thin mist seemed to flow from their mouths each time the tide came close. Other objects were even harder to explain. Thin sheets of metal, uncorroded despite being drenched in salt water for uncounted ages. Some were circular, with patterns across their surfaces, like wheels without axles. When people gazed into the metal, it reflected their faces in strange, shifting ways, as though the metal remembered every person who had ever looked at it. A bronze worker tried melting it in his furnace, but no heat was sufficient. Each time the fire touched the metal, the flame dimmed, and a low hum rose from within the forge. Then the waves brought something larger. Amid the seaweed and foamy surf, they found a massive round stone carved with spiraling grooves. It looked like a globe slowly turning even while still. Touching it revealed the grooves to be twisting paths, all leading toward a single central point. No one knew what it was, but a sea priest quietly said it was not a stone, but a fragment of a map, perhaps a small piece of a world that had existed before the oceans were born. At night, the objects glowed softly. The stones pulsed, the metals vibrated, and the statues seemed to move faintly under the moonlight. No one dared touch them anymore. They only sat from a distance, watching the shore that now resembled the ruins of a temple more than a home for men. Dreams returned to them, again dreams of the same underwater city, now fully illuminated. Its streets were filled with calm-faced beings working without words, beneath a sky made not of air, but of glowing water. When they woke, some found wet sand beneath their beds, and one awoke to find a new engraving on his arm, a spiral like the stone from the shore. Each time the tide rose, the mark pulsed faintly, following the rhythm of the sea, as if the ocean were claiming them one by one, reminding them that it never truly gives. It only lends on, always takes back. That day, the wind stopped. No seabirds flew, and the water's surface became as still as glass. In the coastal village, people began to hear faint sounds from beneath the ground, not rumbling, but something that resembled deep breathing, drawn and released from below the earth. Old wells that once yielded clear water now glimmered greenish with a sheen like oil. When someone stared into them long enough, the reflection shifted not their own face, but a shadowy image of a city beneath the water, moving slowly as if waiting. At night, the houses nearest the shore grew damp from beneath their floors. Water rose from cracks that had long been dry, creeping upward as though it knew the way home. People kept bailing water out, yet it continued to return as if a small sea were growing inside their walls. A child playing in the yard screamed when the ground beneath him silently collapsed, leaving a round hole that exhaled a faint, salty mist. When the villagers peered into it, they heard something like a song from far away, soft but clear, and it felt as if the sound came from within their own chests. By morning, several houses were half flooded, though no rain had fallen. The water rising from the ground was strange. It carried no smell of mud, but was fresh like the sea newly risen. Under sunlight, it shimmered greenish, reflecting slow-moving shapes like stars. The old fisherman said the sea was reclaiming land that never belonged to man. Some chose to leave before sunset, but many stayed, believing it was only a high tide. That night, something stirred beneath the old church. The mossy stone floor trembled softly, and a thin crack spread outward like a root. From the fissure poured clear water, glowing faintly, flowing soundlessly toward the exit. A night guard followed it with his oil lamp, and the water led him to the beach, stopping exactly where the great spiral stone had been found days earlier. There, it began to swirl slowly, forming a small circle of light before sinking back into the sand, as if swallowed by something beneath. By dawn, a heavy scent of salt filled the village air, far stronger than before. The ground around the wells quivered gently, and from deep below came the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the ocean floor. Soon, the entire village seemed to float. The streets turned into long, glimmering pools, and the houses drifted slightly, their foundations lifted by unseen water. Then, by afternoon, the first wave arrived. Not high, not violent, just one silent swell that washed over the shore. Yet when it receded, the village was no longer the same. The wells were gone, the underground tunnels filled with water, and beneath every home was a small whirlpool of shimmering liquid. No one dared approach them. They understood the sea was rising, but not from without. It was rising from underneath their own feet. A few days after the first wave arrived, the village grew quiet in an unnatural way. There were no boat sounds, no children laughing on the beach, not even dogs barking. It was as if the air itself had grown heavy and tired of moving. Mornings came without birds, evenings without long shadows, and the nights stretched endlessly. One by one, the villagers began to disappear. There were no signs of struggle, no traces of escape, only doors left ajar, swaying gently, and candles burning down to their wicks. The first to vanish was an old woman who lived near the cliff. She had always spoken to herself in the afternoons, facing the sea and murmuring to the horizon as if someone were listening. One morning, her house was found empty. The door was unlocked. A bowl of water and dry bread sat untouched on the table. And on the floor were wet footprints leading outside, stopping abruptly at the edge of the cliff. Below, the sea was flat as glass, no waves, no foam. Some villagers called out her name, but their voices bounced back from the open water, hollow and confused, as if the sea itself had forgotten how to answer. After that, disappearances became routine. A whole family never woke up, and when their door was opened, only damp clothing remained on their beds, as if their bodies had dissolved into water. A fisherman was found sitting in his boat, facing the horizon with open eyes, his body cold and rigid. The water in his boat was so clear it reflected the sky from beneath. Some whispered that the sea had reclaimed its people, drawing them back to the world beneath, the one that existed before the land rose. Night after night, fewer houses glowed with light. The sound beneath the ground grew stronger, a long, rising song that seemed to call forgotten names from beneath the waves. The remaining villagers boarded their windows, but the sound still entered, vibrating in their chests, soft and low, as if awakening a buried memory. Some began to speak in their sleep, murmuring words that belonged to no known tongue. Then one night, a small boy ran to a neighbor's house, crying. He said his mother had gone to the shore after hearing his father's voice calling from the sea, though his father had vanished 2 days earlier. When they searched for her, they found only her lantern and clothes on the wet sand, her footprints ending where the tide had touched. The sea remained silent. No waves, no foam, only faint lights drifting below the surface like the reflections of distant stars. The village slowly turned into a standing ghost town. Houses remained intact, windows open, curtains fluttering gently, though no wind blew. In certain places, soft footsteps could be heard at night, though no one was there. The cats that once wandered now sat still, staring toward the sea, their fur damp, their eyes reflecting a pale green glow like moonlight on the water. Each night, the shoreline crept closer to the heart of the village, and by dawn, wet sand brushed the front steps of the nearest homes. No one spoke of leaving anymore. They knew there was nowhere else to go. The sea began to arrive without sound. It did not roar like a storm, nor crash with waves, but crept forward in a slow, unstoppable motion. Its waters crawled along the streets like liquid mist, licking stone and wood, slipping through door cracks and well mouths. Those who remained tried to block every opening with sand and stones, yet the water always found its way in. It did not come only from the shore, but also from beneath the earth, seeping up through floors, rising from the bottoms of wells as if the ground itself had begun to weep. At night, when the moon was half, the water shimmered faintly as if coated in molten metal. No reflections appeared upon it, only the trembling shadows of half-submerged houses. The first home the sea fully claimed was the old one on the cliff, once belonging to a family known for carving salt statues. When the water rose, the house did not collapse. It simply sank, gently and slowly, with a sighing sound while its lantern's glow faded beneath the surface. Witnesses said it looked as though the sea had called it back home. Then the others followed house after house, each disappearing silently, leaving only ripples and the faint shimmer of what looked like golden nets. A few nights later, something began to move within the newly formed depths. Strange lights appeared below the water that now covered the village's center. They were not of one color, sometimes blue, sometimes green, sometimes a dim red like dying embers. The light spun, drifted, and paused beneath houses that still stood above the surface. A man who dared to row close claimed he saw shapes down their buildings with towers, stone stairways, gardens filled with statues. He swore it looked like a city, softly glowing, though lifeless. When he returned to land, his hair and clothes were wet with salt water that smelled metallic, and in his eyes the reflection of the swirling light lingered long after night had fallen. The remaining children began drawing symbols in the sand circles with crossing lines, spirals, and eyes. They said these shapes came from their dreams, glowing from beneath the sea. Their parents tried to erase them, but every morning the same signs reappeared, carved fresh into the shore. As the tide crept higher, some of those marks began to glow beneath the water, as though the sand itself remembered the light. The next day, abandoned fishing boats began to move on their own, gliding gently toward the sea without wind or current. No one dared to stop them. People stood silently on their steps, watching as the boats disappeared, greeted by small waves that moved like slow, rhythmic breathing. By nightfall, the sea had reached the village square. The small beacon tower now stood half underwater, surrounded by rings of faint blue light rippling outward. That night, the entire village glowed from below. There was no moon, no stars, yet the sky shone with a reflection of the water's light. Those still alive stepped out of their homes and stood on their stairs, gazing into the sea that now looked like a vast window into another world. They saw forms that defied explanation, shadows of a city breathing beneath the surface. Towers arched, bridges suspended. There was no sound, only a soft vibration in the air, like music without tone. In that silence, one by one, they closed their eyes and did not open them again. When morning came, nothing remained of the village except the calm, vast sea. There were no ripples, no seabirds in the sky, not even the faintest wind. The surface of the ocean mirrored the heavens so perfectly that one could not tell where the water ended and the sky began. The coral ridges that once lined the shore were now fully submerged, and faint shapes could be seen below, as if houses still stood beneath the waves. Sometimes, if one stood long enough at the cliff's edge, small glimmer appeared far below, like a torch trying to live again in a world that had gone silent. No human voice echoed there, only the faint brushing of water against stone, the slow breath of the earth itself. In that place, time seemed to stop. The days stretched endlessly, and the sun lingered over the horizon longer than it should before sinking into the west. Fishermen from nearby coasts who sailed past that region said their compasses spun strangely, as though losing all direction when they approached the site where the village once stood. The sea shimmered in unnatural colors, sometimes greenish, sometimes silvery, sometimes like glass reflecting another world. None dared to cast their nets there, for they believed that the waters marked the border between the living and the remembered. At night, peculiar things began to happen. When the full moon hung high, the sea above the lost village glowed faintly, not from reflection, but from within. The color of the light shifted slowly, as though the ocean was breathing. At times, a deep metallic ringing echoed from the depths, like a submerged bell tolling 3 slow times before fading away. No one knew the source of the sound, perhaps the remains of a tower still standing below, or something older that could not be named. In time, rumors spread of divers who tried to reach the seafloor and never returned. Some claimed they found a stone staircase descending far deeper than the natural bed, leading into a chamber that should not exist. Others spoke of statues that moved ever so slightly, their pearl eyes tracking intruders through the dark. No one could confirm any of it, for every dive record ended in silence. Yet one tale persisted among the coastal folk. They said that on perfectly still nights, if one listened closely, a song could be heard from beneath the sea. Soft, rhythmic, and wordless, yet so calm that it lulled anyone who heard it into sleep. The old fishermen called it the calling song, and warned their children not to listen for too long. Those who did, they said, never woke upon the shore again. They wandered instead beneath the sea, along glowing stone paths, beside the shadows of those who once lived in the drowned village. From then on, the area became known as the Silent Sea. No ship dared anchor there. Yet strangely, though everyone avoided it, the waters were always calm, even when storms raged nearby. It was as if something beneath guarded its balance, keeping its surface as smooth as glass. On rare, clear mornings, some swore they saw the reflection of an old city across its streets, windows and towers trembling faintly, as though trying to rise before fading when the sunlight dimmed. No one knew whether it was mirage or memory. Perhaps the sea itself remembered, like an eye holding the last image before closing. And anyone who stood on the cliff to gaze below saw not just water, but time, suspended mid-breath. The sea remained calm, without waves, without current, while beneath it, history continued to turn in silence. Years after the region was declared forbidden, a diver named Elric Vane appeared. He wasn't a man of the coast, but a scholar from the north who had heard whispers of the Silent Sea since youth. His study was cluttered with fragments of lost maps, burned journals, and abandoned scientific reports dismissed as superstition. He refused to accept the story as legend. To him, every myth held a grain of truth buried under the fear and mistakes of men. Elric arrived at the nearest harbor with diving gear of his own invention, a strange hybrid of modern mechanics and antique design. His helmet was a heavy brass dome with thick glass windows, and a copper-backed air system rested on his spine. The fishermen watched him with pity, some with laughter, as if he were sailing not for knowledge, but to meet his fate. Yet Elric didn't waver. He recorded wind direction, tide flow, and lunar phase. then waited for the night the sea would truly fall silent, the night the locals called the water's breath. When that night came, he launched his small boat alone. The sky was gray-blue, and the sea lay still as glass. No ripple disturbed it. Beneath the surface, faint luminous veins pulsed in intricate patterns. He fastened his tether, switched on his lamp, and slipped into the water. The surface world faded, replaced by a low hum that came from nowhere. The deeper he went, the quieter everything became. Fish disappeared. The sea seemed to hide its own life. At 200 feet, he halted. Before him stood an immense stone wall too smooth, too precise to be natural. Strange markings glowed faintly where his lamp touched. When he brushed the surface, the current stopped. The entire ocean froze. From the center of the wall, a thin circle of light appeared, rotating slowly, not pulling, not pushing, just existing. Within it lay a void, dark yet solid, like a doorway into stillness itself. Elric reached for his camera, but the moment he did, every instrument died. His lamp flickered, gauges froze, and within that absolute silence, a voice spoke not from the outside, but from within his mind. Elric, he turned sharply. No one. The voice came again, smoother, accompanied by a faint tremor in the surrounding water. From within the circle, a shape emerged, a human outline. It looked almost like Himolder, calmer, with pearl-white eyes. The figure raised a hand and pointed toward the light, inviting him forward. For a moment, Elric hesitated. Every warning, every local tale flashed in his mind, but so did the unshakable pull of discovery. Then, without a sound, he released the tether and swam toward the light. The glow engulfed him until everything became pure white. When his sight returned, he found himself standing, not floating, in a place that defied all sense. The water no longer felt wet. Beneath his feet stretched a vast floor of polished stone radiating pale blue light. In the distance rose towers like those of the drowned village, built from something that looked like living glass. A faint metallic hum resonated in the air, without source. Then he noticed something deeply wrong. Nothing cast a shadow. Everything shone, but no darkness existed. Each step made no echo, as if the world itself was still forming. At the city's center hovered a metallic sphere, revolving slowly, covered in glowing symbols. Around it stood translucent figures, human-shaped, watching him silently. The voice returned, deeper, almost kind. "Welcome back, Elric. You have found the time that forgot to stop." Elric stood there for a long time, unsure whether he was dreaming or had stepped beyond the borders of human reality. The air that wasn't wet, the structures that hadn't decayed, and the light that came from nowhere, all of it pulled his mind between awe and fear. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Every word he wanted to say dissolved before becoming a voice. In that absolute stillness, the only thing he could hear was his own heartbeat, fading slowly as he walked deeper into the city. He passed rows of transparent pillars filled with glowing bubbles. Each step made them tremble softly, producing notes like a submerged harp. The city seemed alive. Its surfaces shimmered like fish scales, yet every reflection lagged slightly, as if time itself hesitated. When he gazed into one pillar, the face that stared back wasn't his own. It had deeper eyes, paler skin, and a faint smile that seemed only partly human. At the city's heart stood a spiral temple pulsing with dim light. From its center rose drifting particles forming luminous symbols in the air. They weren't letters, but memories, and he understood them without reading. Each glow carried the recollection of the world itself. Suddenly, visions flooded his mind. The same sea without water, green valleys, rivers under a rose sky. Tall, radiant beings moved slowly among crystal towers, silent but aware. Then darkness fell. The sky fractured. The world shattered into shards of light. Elric collapsed, gasping as if centuries had passed through him in seconds. The transparent figures drew closer, their movements silent, their presence rippling the air. One, more human than the rest, touched his shoulder a chill, soft as mist. The voice spoke again, clearer. We are remnants of a world that never finished. We lived before the sea, knew depth, before time learned direction. When the world first dreamed, we were its thoughts. He stood frozen, heartbeat aligning with something vast. The figure gestured toward a wall, where images bloomed a map of Earth, but wrong. Continents joined oddly, coasts curled in alien ways, and in the ocean's heart burned a single light. The voice deepened. Beneath the waves lie cities from cycles that failed. Humanity was not the first to seek meaning. We drowned not for sin, but because time refused us. Elric realized with a cold shock that the sea he had entered was not a grave of the past, but a membrane between worlds, between what was and what almost existed. Perhaps he had not found history, but a version of Earth that was never born. Then the sky trembled. The figures began to fade. The temple's light swelled, and the voice grew vast. Do not fear. Every world has its reflection in water. He blinked, and the light swallowed everything. When vision returned, he was back in his small boat beneath a gray sky. The air smelled of salt. His camera hung from his hand, lifeless. He glanced at its darkened screen and froze. In the final image, faint and blurred, stood towers of glass beneath the sea, and a single translucent figure gazing upward, toward him. The days after Elric returned from the sea felt like shadows of a life he once knew. The sky looked paler, the wind heavier, and even time seemed to move slower than before. He often woke before dawn to find strange patterns of dew on his window, shifting like maps that changed whenever he blinked. Sometimes he heard faint ringing from far away, like chimes rising from the ocean's floor, even though he lived far from the shore. He told himself it was exhaustion, but deep inside he knew something had changed, not just around him, but within him. When he turned his camera back on, its dead screen flickered to life, glowing faintly blue, like moonlight in water. There were no new images, yet the memory inside it felt alive, as though the device remembered something it never recorded. For a brief moment, his reflection on the screen moved slower than he did, smiling faintly, and behind it shimmered the outline of glass towers beneath the sea. He snapped the device shut, but the chill in his hand remained. Each night, he dreamed of the city again, this time without the ocean. He walked through cracked streets where the glowing pillars had turned to pale ash. Among the ruins, the same translucent figure appeared, eyes gleaming faintly. It never spoke, only watched him, waiting. Sometimes Elric felt that it wasn't another being at all, but a part of himself left behind. In the mornings, he began to record everything in a small notebook. Each sentence seemed written by two minds, one rationale, one belonging to something that no longer lived fully in this world. He sketched the spiral patterns that appeared on his windows, realizing they resembled the temple floor beneath the sea. With each rainfall, the shapes shifted slightly, as though forming words in a forgotten language. One evening at sunset, he returned to the cliff above the ocean. The waves shimmered strangely, tinted green and silver like living light. On the horizon, he thought he saw faint towers beneath the surface. The wind smelled of salt and metal, carrying a low hum that could have been the breath of something ancient. He closed his eyes, listening. The sound wasn't menacing, it was patient, steady, like the pulse of a world asleep. A voice stirred in his mind, not in language, but in rhythm. We are not gone. We are only waiting for the sea to speak again. When he opened his eyes, the sea was ordinary once more. The sky faded to violet. Birds flew west. He smiled faintly, realizing that the line between his world and the one beneath had thinned to a whisper. The journey was not over. He had not just found a sunken city, but unlocked a door that could never again be closed. As night fell, he turned to leave. Behind him, in the last gleam of dusk, something glimmered, a transparent hand rising from the water, touching the surface softly before vanishing into silence. Elric turned, but only the waves remained. He walked home beneath the darkening sky, unaware that the world had already begun to remember what it once forgot. The following weeks grew stranger. Elric was no longer the only one who felt something shift. Along the coasts, fishermen complained that the deep sea fish were rising closer to the surface, as if something below was driving them away. On some beaches, the sand glowed faintly at night, not bright enough to be called bioluminescent, but bright enough that people left glowing footprints as they walked. Children thought it was magic. Scientists called it a rare natural effect. And the elders simply watched the sea in silence, as if recognizing an old face that had just remembered their name. Elric read those reports with a quiet dread and relief. He knew the ocean was reopening something once sealed. Each story of ships drifting off course on clear days, or bells ringing from beneath the waves, felt like fragments of his own dream. He wrote polite letters to oceanographic institutes describing what he had seen. But only one reply ever came from someone who signed simply A.R. Voss. We know, do not approach again. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning from someone who had looked even deeper into the dark. That night, Elric dreamed again, but he wasn't in the underwater city. He stood between two worlds, on a shore that stretched endlessly beneath a trembling sky. Two moons hung above him, one pale silver, the other deep green, like the eyes of something watching from afar. The sand beneath his feet moved like breath, and from the distance came footsteps, many unseen. He knew instinctively that the world was shifting towards something inevitable. When he awoke, everything felt too still. The birds were silent, and the clock had stopped at 3:17. The air was heavy, damp, waiting. He looked out to sea, and this time he saw it clearly, the glass tower rising from the waves, gleaming like a newly discovered mirror. It wasn't imagination. Even the dogs in the village howled in unison, sensing something older than fear itself. By evening, the world was already talking. Photos flooded the internet's strange towers, surfacing across the globe. In the Atlantic, the South China Sea, the Arctic, it's all identical, all radiant, all gone before dawn. Governments called it an optical illusion, but Elric knew the truth. The markings on the towers were the same spirals he'd seen on his window. That night, he wrote one line in his notebook, his hand trembling. They are not returning to us. We are returning to them. The following days felt like the world was holding its breath and never exhaling. The sky seemed darker even in daylight, and the sea shimmered as if something vast stirred beneath, awakening from an age-long slumber. In some coastal towns, the tides rose and fell with no relation to the moon. Scientists called it a temporary gravitational fluctuation. But the elders by the shore watched quietly, as if they had heard this story before. Some began lighting incense by the sea, whispering prayers not found in any book-hold rhythms that made the air tremble. Elric found it harder to separate what was real from what wasn't. Sometimes, while staring into his morning coffee, the surface rippled and reflected the image of that same underwater city's winding streets, transparent towers, and slow-moving figures waiting for a call that would never come. He recorded each vision, trying to trace a pattern, but the more he wrote, the thinner reality seemed. As if the world he knew was just a veil over something far older. Children by the shore began finding strange objects washed up after storm spiral stones, smooth as glass, fragments of blue-green metal that never rusted even after days in salt water. Some pieces hummed softly when touched. Researchers arrived, took samples, and left with puzzled faces. None could explain their origin. One night, Elric received an unmarked package. Inside was a small gray stone carved with the same spirals seen on the glass towers. It was cold and faintly vibrating in his hand, pulsing like a tiny heartbeat. He placed it on his desk and watched it for hours, until he began to hear something, an echo, from deep within the sea. It wasn't a human voice. It was a vibration felt in his chest. He closed his eyes and knew it was not just a stone. It was a key, or perhaps an invitation. The next day, news reports spoke of new phenomena. Along coastlines around the world, lights were seen glowing beneath the ocean, forming vast circular patterns visible from the air. They pulsed rhythmically, like the heartbeat of the planet awakening after millennia of silence. People called it the sea's first breath. No one knew its meaning. Yet many felt strangely comforted, as if the earth was reintroducing itself gently. Elric wrote in his notebook a sentence that seemed to come from somewhere else. Greater than they never drowned the city. They merely put it to sleep until we were ready to remember. As he wrote, His hands trembled not from fear, but from a strange certainty that the sea would not stop speaking. He only needed to learn to listen in a language long forgotten. Soon after, the world began to dream together. People across the continents woke with wet eyes and trembling breaths, recalling the same fragments. A city of light beneath the sea, a voice calling from the depths, and a giant shadow wandering through ruins as if searching for something lost. In online forums, on news broadcasts, in classrooms, everyone spoke of it. No one could explain why the dream was identical or how it could appear to millions at once. Some dismissed it as mass coincidence, born of collective stress. Others suggested that perhaps something truly was trying to communicate. But for Elric, the dream felt like a continuation of something that had begun long ago, something that had waited patiently to be remembered. He read every report, marking the names of the places that appeared repeatedly in people's dreams. The pattern was strange, forming a great circle that encircled the ocean. From the Indian Ocean to the Eastern Pacific, each region seemed to pulse at the same frequency, like a colossal neural network awakening one node at a time. When he mapped them all, they formed a spiral pattern identical to the carving on the small stone he now carried everywhere. That night, he sat on his balcony, watching the sea a few kilometers away. The air was damp, filled with the sounds of insects and the distant hiss of waves. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift. In that silence, he heard something again, not a sound, but a rhythm. It rose and fell slowly, repeating with an inhuman patience. The rhythm came from beneath the earth, from the direction of the ocean, from depths unreachable. He realized the world was awakening, not because something arrived from outside, but because something within humanity was being remembered. Perhaps the sea was not speaking with sound, but through a buried memory written in blood, in every molecule of water that had ever touched life. Perhaps these dreams were the earth rewriting a story it once lost. On the radio came new reports. Fishermen off southern Japan heard what sounded like a woman's song in the middle of the sea on a moonless night. No boats, no lights, just a soft voice following the waves, then vanishing suddenly. In the Atlantic, satellites detected a subtle rise in ocean temperature, as if heat were rising from a long frozen floor. Scientists speculated volcanic activity, yet the pattern was too orderly to be natural. Elric wrote again, unconsciously, as if his hand no longer belonged to him. Greater than, water remembers. Stone remembers. Only man forgets. The words felt like an incantation, thickening the air around him. He knew that behind all these phenomena, there was something far beyond geology or shared dreams. It was older than history, deeper than myth. The world was slowly uncovering itself, and the sea, in its silence, seemed to be waiting for a reply. By dawn, the sky in the east glowed bluish-green, a color never seen before. People stepped outside, gazing upward in quiet disbelief. Over the ocean, lights like auroras shimmered not at the poles, but along the equator, dancing like ribbons, flowing from one continent to another. There was no explosion, no thunder, just soft, graceful motion, as if the earth was showing its old face before humans arrived. Elric smiled faintly. He knew something had begun again. A few days after the equatorial aurora appeared, the deep-sea research vessel Okeanos, VA, departed from a small port in the Azores. Officially, its mission was simple: to examine an unexpected surge in underwater thermal activity. Yet among the crew, no one truly knew what they were searching for. Everyone had heard of the dream. Even Captain Serrano, an old man hardened by decades at sea, confessed that nights before, he had dreamed vividly of a city of light beneath the waves, so clear he could count the pillars of a sunken temple. Since then, the ocean had felt different to him, more alive, more aware, as if it watched back. When Okeanos VI reached the first coordinates, its sonar caught a strange echo from nearly 10,000 meters deep. The formation didn't resemble natural rock. Its reflection was too regular, too deliberate. Sonar operator Era stared wide-eyed at her monitor. The lines on the screen formed steps, descending slowly into the black trench known as the Eastern Azores Abyss. No geological record mentioned any structure there. Yet it was there, visible, undeniable. Serrano ordered the team to deploy the ROV camera, small robotic vehicle designed for extreme depths. For 2 long hours, they waited until the video feed finally showed something. At first, there was only darkness, then faint blue dots that looked like plankton. As the robot descended, the blue patterns grew intricate lines and curves resembling ancient writing. The camera turned, revealing a massive wall made of something like obsidian, shimmering with pearly light. Etched upon it was a spiral symbol identical to the one carved on the small stone Elric had found months earlier. There was silence, except for the faint hiss of machinery. Then, from the underwater microphone came an unexpected sound. Not static, not whale song, but a low rhythmic tone like breathing. The sound rose and fell with perfect intervals. Era checked the audio feed. It wasn't interference. The frequency spectrum showed order, almost linguistic rhythm. Serrano tried muting the channel, but the sound persisted even after the system was shut down. It wasn't transmission. It was emanating from the sea itself, from the stone, or from something behind it. The scientists exchanged wary glances, some afraid, others mesmerized. One linguist whispered that the frequency pattern resembled proto-human phonetics, a language extinct for tens of thousands of years. Nobody could explain how that was possible, but the vibrations felt almost as if they were trying to pronounce a name. As night fell, the sea grew unnaturally calm. The wind died. The waves ceased. Then, from the depths, came light. Not the glow of plankton, but a soft golden radiance seeping through cracks in the obsidian wall. The ROV recorded everything. The light traced the spiral engravings, flowing like molten gold through the grooves until the entire wall pulsed like a breathing creature. Serrano ordered the camera to retreat, but before it could ascend, the sound changed again. The calm tone fractured into whispers, thousands of voices speaking at once in an unrecognizable language. The ship's microphones captured frequencies beyond human hearing. Some crew members clutched their chests, feeling an immense pressure building, as if the ocean itself was inhaling. Then, everything stopped. The light vanished. The sound was gone. The sea fell silent once more. But in the control room, one thing remained. On the main screen appeared a message that came from no known system aboard. White letters, simple, still, greater than we are remembering. No one knew who had written it or from where it came. At 2:37 a.m., only minutes after the mysterious message appeared, Okino's VI systems began to fail. Lights flickered, monitors pulsed as if a heartbeat was running through the ship's circuits. Era checked the power graphs, no internal fluctuation. The disturbance was external, radiating from the ocean itself. Captain Serrano barked orders for all hands to brace, while the ROV operator tried to reel the camera back up. But the carbon fiber tether had gone taut, as if something below was holding it. The video feed remained active. On screen, the obsidian wall had changed. Cracks glowed with silver light, swirling like metallic vapor made solid. The luminous spiral rotated slowly, and each pulse registered as a microgravitational wave, something no one had ever observed naturally in Earth's oceans. "Cut the tether," Serrano shouted. Before they could, the camera captured a shape emerging from the radiance. A hand not human, not wholly alien either, its surface textured like living stone, its motion deliberate and ancient. It brushed the engraved spirals gently, tracing them as if rereading words it had once written eons ago. Every motion sent rhythmic tremors through the sonar feed. Then the frequencies shifted. The vibrations became a kind of song, not speech, but a mathematical chant. The ship's linguist began to record, then froze mid-sentence. "It's not language," she murmured. "It's data, instructions. Someone's uploading memory through sound." Moments later, the entire seabed trembled. The ROV camera whited out of her exposed end. The feed died instantly. Silence followed. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the control room. But the quiet didn't last. The same deep tone returned, this time from the hull itself. A pattern of faint knocking traveled through the metal. 3 short taps, 2 long, 3 short again. Old Morse code SOs. Serrano froze. There was no way anything below could know that code endless, whatever was down there, had known humans long before we knew ourselves. They tried sending a distress signal, but the frequencies warped. The sea grew viscous, gleaming darkly beneath the moonlight. From the distance, a piercing blue light broke the surface and began to rise. Slowly, majestically, it illuminated the entire ocean until the waves shone like molten glass. Era pressed her face against the deck window. Something was surfacing, not a ship, not a creature, but a structure. A colossal geometric form, emerging piece by piece. A city returning from the world's forgotten memory. Morning came without light. The sky over the Atlantic was a dim shade of violet gray, and a dense fog hung low over the water's still surface. Okino's Vi floated motionless, facing something that had risen from the deep, a presence that defied all known laws of geology and time. Before the ship stretched the silhouette of a city, emerging from the ocean like the memory of a dream. Its walls were made of blackened silver stone, smooth like basalt, polished by centuries. The structures were symmetrical, patterned, unnaturally precise, reflecting pale glimmers of distorted light, as though the air itself still held the warmth of another age. The crew stood silently on deck. The sea had receded to form a massive basin around the city, revealing layers of ancient coral and the fossilized remains of creatures long extinct. Towers jutted upward like the teeth of a sleeping titan. Massive oval windows reflected a faint, pulsating blue glow, as though dormant engines were breathing deep beneath the ruins. Through her digital scope, Era traced the city's geometry. Every tower stood at an exact distance from a central point. When mapped digitally, the layout formed a double helix, a spiral resembling DNA. It wasn't simply a city, she realized. It might have been alive, or perhaps built to mimic life itself. Then she saw something else. On the western edge, between two colossal pillars, stood a monolith gleaming with obsidian sheen. At its center was a circular core of pale blue metal, carved with lines that pulsed gently, flowing like veins. From within came a low, resonant hum, slow, rhythmic, organic, like a heart beginning to beat after eons of stillness. "Is it a machine?" one of the technicians asked. Serrano said nothing. He stared at the sonar screen flashing with magnetic interference. The numbers for gravity and pressure oscillated wildly, as if the field surrounding the city no longer obeyed Earth's rules. The ship began to tremble slightly. Massive bubbles rose around the ruins, bursting on the surface and releasing the scent of ozone and metal. A breeze drifted from the south, carrying with it a whisper, not words, but a deep vibration that pressed into the skull. Era heard it inside her mind, saying something she couldn't quite remember yet somehow already knew. In that moment, she understood. The city hadn't appeared, Dai had returned. It wasn't destroyed by catastrophe. It had been hidden by something older than the sea itself. The drone camera flew closer, passing through the towering gate. It captured carvings of hybrid figures, human bodies with the heads of fish, and birds holding crystal-like objects emitting rays of light. Below them, spirals and vertical lines repeated endlessly. The AI translator processed the symbols and displayed the result. "We were not the first. We will not be the last. Time is only the breath of the sea itself." Serrano read the words aloud, his voice unsteady. The city began to glow, the blue light spreading through its towers, tracing along streets, seeping into the water around it. It was as if the entire city had started remembering its own existence. Nothing moved, yet every person aboard knew what they had just witnessed. The city was alive, or it was learning how to be alive again. They prepared for the first ascent with trembling hands. No one wanted to admit that the air on the ship had grown heavier, as if pressed by an unseen force. The sea was unnaturally calm, but deep below, the sonar kept catching a slow rhythm like the pulse of a giant heart. Era donned her carbon fiber diving suit, its transparent helmet reflecting the faint blue shimmer from the city beneath. She checked her oxygen levels and began her descent with two others gliding down the motionless wall of the ocean. The diving capsule sank slowly, its sidelights piercing a strange, green-tinted darkness that looked more like molten glass than water. Outside, large silver fish moved languidly around stone ruins, wrapped in glowing coral. There was a quiet beauty to it, a dreamlike stillness too ancient for sound. As they neared the bottom, the sight unfolded like a reversed sky, Beneath them lay the city, glowing softly with thousands of blue and green lights arranged like constellations mirrored from above. The structures weren't rough stone as they first appeared. They were smooth, almost glass-like, alive with shifting symbols that flickered faintly. The city breathed without lungs. They landed on a broad platform that might once have been a plaza. The stone beneath their feet was warm, pulsing gently with a rhythm like a heartbeat. In its center stood a colossal statue, 10 meters tall, depicting a being with a human body and an unrecognizable sea creature's head. Its arms were raised, holding a silver sphere that reflected Era's face, distorted, as if seen through the eyes of another age. Did that just move? One of the divers asked through the Cum's voice, trembling. Era said nothing. The sphere began to rotate slowly, untouched. Around it, grains of sand lifted, swirling as though caught in invisible gravity. The orb stopped spinning. From within, a glow appeared. Soft, bioluminescent tan patterns emerged in the water, forming symbols that looked like a map or a language. The AI on board the capsule activated, translating the forms into spatial data. The results showed an Earth that did not match any known configuration, a single great ring of land circling the equator. Serrano, watching from above, whispered, "That's not our Earth. That's the one before the oceans divided it." His words lingered as the map came alive, showing land shifting, light flaring, and a massive whirlpool swallowing everything in its path. At the edge of the plaza, Era found a building with an open doorway. Inside, the air felt warmer. The walls were made of something between metal and living stone. In the center stood a table, and atop it lay a transparent cylinder filled with golden liquid. Inside floated a crystalline hand, perfectly formed, its fingers flexing slowly as if still breathing. A faint sound echoed from within the tube. Not mechanical, not from the sea, but a whisper traveling through time, something too ancient to remember. Era stared at the hand, then noticed her own reflection changing. The skin on her fingers looked translucent, vibrating faintly as though resonating with the city's pulse. She exhaled. "We shouldn't be here," she murmured, but it was too late. The city had already recognized them, at a certain depths where the pressure of the sea crushes all that is fragile and only the eternal may endure. Lies a city known by old divers as Nazra. No map marks its place. No coordinates can pinpoint it. Those who claim to have seen it describe a vision bordering on dream upside-down towers, streets spiraling like whirlpools, and giant statues standing amid blue algae. In the heavy silence, the city seems to be waiting for something. Its white stones still glow faintly, as though holding the last sunlight of a vanished age. Archaeologists who attempt to trace its remains often lose direction, their compasses spinning endlessly, their cameras capturing shadows of human forms drifting behind the ruins. A diver from Iceland once said he heard faint chimes, like thin metal discs brushing together, though nothing surrounded him but the still sea. Some theories propose that Nazaru was the center of a maritime civilization predating Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley. They built their palaces beneath the sea, believing proximity to water granted immortality to their spirits. Each structure was said to be connected by winding corridors forming a flawless geometric network. As if someone had drawn the underworld according to the laws of the stars above. Reliefs carved on the walls depict human figures with fins upon their backs and wide, unblinking eyes, gazing toward the sky. No one knows if these were mythic symbols or real beings once dwelling in those depths. Modern divers insist that time in Nazareth does not flow as it does elsewhere. When they return to the surface, their watches show only minutes lost, though they feel they have spent hours below. Some even dream of the city afterward, dreams vivid and haunting, where they wander through moss-covered streets and hear soft songs in no known tongue. In those dreams, air feels heavy like water, and water feels light like air. Each step echoes as though taken in a hollow cathedral. There are stories, too, of the guardians of Nazareth. Not monsters, but something subtler, silver shimmer, moving at the edge of vision. They are called the silent custodians, keepers who do not breathe, but only observe. In 1928, a Japanese diver wrote that he saw a pair of enormous eyes behind a stone window staring directly at him before vanishing like smoke. He never dove again. The city, he said, is not meant to be seen by the living. Today, whenever research vessels drop sonar equipment in that region, the results are always the same distortion, echoes, and sometimes shapes resembling towers. Yet when confirmed by another ship, the image is gone. As if the sea itself decides to whom it will reveal its secrets. Amid the slow currents and the hum of engines, scientists often fall silent longer than usual, realizing perhaps that they are touching something far older than history. Some believe Nazareth is not merely a sunken city, but a place where the real world meets the shadow of time. Perhaps every lost civilization leaves an echo beneath the sea, and Nazareth is the loudest echo of them all. No one knows how long it will endure before sand and coral swallow it completely. Yet, as long as one person still dreams of it, Nazareth will continue to exist, quivering softly between the ripples, waiting for someone brave enough to look upon it once more. When night falls over the sea and the horizon dissolves, Nazareth becomes more real to those who know how to listen, not with their eyes, but with the stillness in their chest. Waves press gently against the city's walls, making a sound faint as a long breath from the past. In the dark water, the ruins catch the trembling reflection of the moon, creating the illusion that the city is singing a note only the ocean can hear. Scientists call it natural resonance, yet for those who have dived deep enough, it feels like something beyond physics. Some say the sound comes from salt crystals embedded in the temple stones, vibrating at precise frequencies when touched by the current. Others believe it is the echo of thousands of prayers trapped between marble columns, never reaching the surface. The oldest tale calls Nazareth the city that lived twice, once under the sun and once beneath the waves. Its people were said to be craftsmen of time who could carve clocks from water and write poetry upon the tides. Every structure they built was designed to breathe with the current, and every corridor had its own tone that shifted with the seasons of the sea. During the winter tides, the city would hum in low, deep notes like a choir of whales calling home. No city above the surface could rival that tranquil beauty. They believed that as long as the song of their city endured, their spirits had not truly departed. Yet the sea is a creature without loyalty. In one night, unrecorded by any chronicle, the waters rose higher than ever before. The moonlight fractured on the restless surface, and the city sank slowly, as if answering a gentle pull from the abyss. There were no screams, no resistance, only a long silence. Some legends claim the people did not die. They merely closed their eyes to sleep beside their city, waiting for the right time to wake again. Even now, at certain depths, divers claim to glimpse soft faces beyond their glass helmets, miles not of menace, but of patience. When sunlight reaches the ruins on certain days, reflections sometimes appear like writing that cannot be read, letters that seem to drift with the current, like a message unwilling to be understood. Archaeologists have tried to record them, but the symbols always change once brought to the surface. In every photo and sketch, the shapes are never the same. Some begin to believe that the city is still writing its own history, line by line, using the light of the sea as its ink. In that silence, Nazarah becomes both the author and the manuscript, keeping secrets even time cannot decipher. Old villagers who live 1,000 kilometers away from the supposed site say that on nights of high tide, the sea sometimes rings like a bell. They believe it is a sign that Nazareth has stirred for a moment, remembering something lost. No one knows what it remembers, perhaps a name, perhaps the sound of wind from before the sea arrived. Beyond all theories and science, there remains something that cannot be explained, something that trembles between the human heart and the turning of the water. In its silence, Nazareth seems to wait for someone who can listen to the song until the end. Someone who seeks not gold or truth, but only the feeling of living in a world that no longer exists. A world that never truly left, but chose to speak through the waves. In its gentle and patient way, the sea cradles that city, as if waiting for the day humanity stops digging and starts listening. The sea has its own way of remembering, not through writing or images, but through pressure, temperature, and current. Every wave is a moving memory, carrying stories from the deep to the surface and back again without ever stopping. Inside that seemingly still body of water lie layers that store echoes of everything that has ever fallen, drifted, or been forgotten. Scientists call it acoustic sediment, yet old fishermen prefer to call it the breath of the sea. It is said that within it, the voices of lost cities rest. They do not speak like humans, but through vibrations that travel through the water, entering the bones of divers who dare to descend deep enough. In that silence, one might hear something resembling a song without melody, or a story without words. Several deep-sea expeditions have recorded strange anomalies at the ocean floor. Low-frequency waves that repeat every 132 hours. No one knows their source. The signal is too regular for coincidence, too subtle for machines, and too alive for stone. Some believe it is the lingering resonance of Nazareth, the city still breathing in another form. Others insist the sound comes from something far older, perhaps a civilization that left behind nothing but echoes. If the sea truly remembers, then in its depths may lie a record that cannot be read by eyes only felt. The tales of old divers often sound like fables. Some say they have heard whispers calling names unknown to them. Others claim to have seen shadows of hands writing on coral walls before fading into the haze of water. There is no proof, only vague recollections and a fear that cannot be explained. Those who stay too long beneath the waves often return with hollow eyes, as if they had seen something that should not exist. When asked, they simply say the sea does not wish to be seen, only heard. Yet it is not only sound that carries the memory. Cold currents from the north bring fine silver particles, which, when analyzed, show crystalline structures unknown in any terrestrial rock. Geologists are baffled. There is no logical reason why the particles appear crafted, though they come from seabed layers over 2 million years old. Meanwhile, ancient legends from islands around the same ocean have long spoken of metallic rain that once fell from the sky before the age of man. Perhaps the sea is not merely the grave of old worlds, but the cradle of something that once tried to become a new one. From the research vessel at night, the ocean appears like a pane of glass holding secrets below. No city lights, no bird song, only pressing silence and the slowing rhythm of a heartbeat. Some young researchers confess they sometimes dream of a glowing underwater city with towers pulsing like veins. They wake with tight chests and an uncanny certainty that something from the deep has called their name. Perhaps it is only the effect of pressure, perhaps a gentle invitation from a world longing to be remembered. The sea, in its calm way, never truly forgets. It keeps every civilization as an echo, every name as a current, every fall as a wave. The world beneath its surface is not dead, but waiting recording in moving silence. There, in the layers untouched by light, perhaps everything that ever was still speaks to one another, only not in a language we understand. In a time much closer to ours, when humans had conquered the sky and the ocean floor with machines, an unavoidable question arose. Had we truly discovered something new, or merely returned to what once was? Amid sonar technology, research submarines, and underwater drones, humans began to hear again the voices once dismissed as legends. These sounds did not come from whales or tectonic shifts, but from something more deliberate, like a pattern of language unknown to any living species. Each frequency formed a wave that seemed to respond, as if someone far away was speaking with inhuman patience. Researchers from many countries recorded it, mapped its patterns, and then fell silent. They knew too much to reveal, too little to understand. The sea, as always, offered clues only to those who did not rush. A laboratory on Iceland's northern coast once recorded a sound resembling singing. Each segment lasted about 3 minutes, followed by 2 hours of silence before repeating. Its frequency was constant, as though controlled by something meticulous. When translated into a visual spectrogram, the wave pattern formed a double spiral. Similar to ancient carvings found on Bronze Age stones in Western Europe. Archaeologists were astonished by the resemblance, as if the ocean preserved the same language once carved by human hands thousands of years ago. Some called it coincidence, others called it a message. No one truly knew, as always. Amid the confusion came strange reports from modern divers. Equipped with advanced gear, 8K cameras, and pressure sensors, they still found themselves facing phenomena technology could not explain. One was psychological, at depths around 2,300 meters. Some divers claimed to hear faint whispers not through their ears, but inside their minds. The words had no language, yet carried emotion, calmness, sorrow, and an indistinct nostalgia. When they returned to the surface, many cried without knowing why. Researchers named it deep-sea emotional resonance. Another incident occurred in the Western Pacific, where a Japanese research vessel lost contact for 17 minutes. All recording devices remained active, but only one sound was heard on the log, a low hum that gradually turned into a melody. No human voices, no interference. No interference, only a sound that felt sentient, waiting to be heard. When the ship reconnected, the crew had no memory of time lost. They said it felt like seconds. No one was hurt, but all felt watched by something beneath. Meanwhile, on land, researchers sought to interpret the phenomenon through mathematics and archaeology. Some theorized that the sea acts as a natural memory system, where vibrations from the past remain and can resurface under the right conditions, like echoes in a cave, but on a planetary scale. Every undersea mountain, every trench, serves as a resonant chamber for civilizations long gone. If true, then each storm or undersea quake might be the ocean speaking, not merely moving. Yet the most unsettling theory came from a small independent group in Eastern Europe. They proposed that the ocean was not only preserving memory, but attempting to communicate. If an ancient civilization truly had a collective consciousness absorbed into the water after its fall, then all these frequencies might be the voices of beings that still exist, just not in physical form. The idea was mocked by most scientists, yet no one could deny that something was indeed happening below. Night aboard a research vessel always carried the same feeling: smallness before the infinite. The sea breeze shimmered under moonlight, and the surface appeared peaceful. Yet beneath that calm, something continued to move, speaking in long waves that could only be heard by hearts quiet enough to listen. Perhaps the ocean was calling back those once lost ore, simply reminding humankind that not everything silent is lifeless. Over time, more strange frequencies were captured from the uncharted depths. Each year, scientists discovered new patterns, some resembling musical harmonies. Others, like coded signals, almost mathematical. Yet the most striking aspect wasn't the sound itself, but how the ocean seemed to respond to human presence. When sensors were left unattended, the signals remained stable and repetitive. But whenever humans were near, the patterns became erratic, as if something was adjusting itself to the observer. This phenomenon became known as the observer tide, the current that watches back. It suggested that the sea was not a passive entity, but something aware of being observed. During a joint research mission in the Indian Ocean, a French-Indian vessel attempted to map depths beyond 5,000 meters. In the middle of the operation, their sonar detected a massive shadow beneath the surface, moving slowly against the deep-sea current. It measured approximately 2.4 kilometers in length. Cameras recorded nothing but a thick, greenish mist reflecting sonar light. When the ship tried to approach, every electronic system shut down for 16 minutes. When power returned, there was nothing, no sound. no shadow was if the sea had folded its secrets back into itself. Months later, analysis of the recordings revealed something stranger. Hidden among the random frequencies was a faint murmur, which, when slowed down 1,000 times, resembled a long whisper with a human-like cadence. Its words remained unidentified, but its rhythm followed a breathing pattern steady, rising and falling like someone asleep. The research team called it Project Somnus, after the Roman god of dreams. Their theory proposed that if the sea truly preserved ancient consciousness, then this breath might be the lingering life of a civilization still dreaming beneath the waves. Curiously, ancient texts from different cultures describe the same concept in various forms. In the Vedas, there is Samudra Manthon, the living, churning ocean that holds divine secrets. In Egyptian records, the god Nun represents the primordial sea from which all life emerged and to which it will return. In Celtic lore, the drowning memory tells of human spirits merging with the water, awaiting rebirth. The parallels were too strong to dismiss as coincidence. At this point, researchers began speaking more cautiously. They realized that every attempt to understand the sea logically was met with deeper riddles. No single truth could be grasped. Every discovery, every wave, every sound was merely a shard of something far larger, a consciousness unbound by time or language. Some scientists withdrew, while others became consumed by obsession. And then came the question whispered among them, what if we were not the first beings to walk upon the earth, but descendants of those who once lived beneath it? What if the ocean is not a remnant of the past, but the original home, waiting for us to return? In its silence, the sea may not merely remember it, may be calling. It does not shout. It does not rage. It simply sings, in a frequency we have yet to understand. Perhaps, in the end, the world will not end in fire as humankind imagines, but in waves, when the ocean opens its eyes once more. The ocean never truly sleeps. Even in its deepest silence, it moves, adjusts, and breathes. Every vortex beneath thousands of meters feels like the heartbeat of something older than time itself. There are moments when researchers on night shifts aboard research vessels report hearing sounds that should not exist. Not the calls of whales. Not machinery, but a soft chorus from far away, layered with echoes and harmonies, too delicate for any known creature. No one has ever proven it scientifically. Yet many have noted that the sound always comes at the same hour, just before dawn, when the sea is at its calmest. In official logs, this phenomenon is called aural mirage, a mirage of sound. Once, during an expedition in the Norwegian Sea, an oceanographer named Dr. Leen Helvig recorded a sudden change in water pressure unrelated to seismic activity. She described it as the Earth remembering itself. When the captured acoustic waves were analyzed, it showed a low-frequency pattern forming a symmetrical sequence resembling the structure of DNA. It was as if the ocean had stored the biological record of ancient life in the form of sound. If that theory were true, then every crashing wave might simply be a fragment of memory from long extinct beings, retold by water that never forgets. Yet among all the scientific and metaphysical theories, one legend continues to return like waves on a shore: the tale of the cities beneath the waves. the sunken civilizations that existed before recorded history. Some call it Atlantis, others Hybrasil or Lemuria, but the essence remains the same. There was once a time when the sea was not a boundary, but a home for civilizations that gazed at the stars from beneath the ocean. This legend transcends cultures and continents, appearing in Polynesian folklore, Sumerian myths, even in highland Peruvian carvings depicting half-human, half-fish figures wearing crowns of coral. When archaeologists scanned the seabed with high-resolution sonar, they found symmetrical stone formations at depths impossible to explain by natural processes. These structures resembled stairways, pillars, and straight roads stretching for more than 3 kilometers under the surface, covered in algae and limestone. Yet every time expeditions tried to retrieve samples for carbon analysis, storms suddenly appeared, destroying equipment and delaying research for months. A similar event occurred near Japan at the Yanaguni Monumentan underwater pyramid-like formation, too precise to be the work of nature. Skeptical scientists call these coincidences of geology. But for those who believe, the sea seems to resist remembrance. They say water has will, and whatever sinks beneath it will only be revealed when the world is ready to remember. It's a mystical theory. Yet old sailors swear they've seen faint lights dancing beneath the waves on moonless night lights, not from plankton, but glowing from within the ruins themselves. In that silence lies an unspoken reverence. Humanity can only gaze at the surface, trying to guess what lies beyond the endless dark. Yet perhaps the ocean is not meant to be solved like a puzzle. Perhaps it wishes to remain a living mystery, a mirror of humanity's endless curiosity. Within every crashing wave against the rocks, there is a quiet whisper that says, "Do not rush to understand, simply listen." For some secrets were never written to be known, but to be remembered slowly by those who dare to look long enough. There is an ancient belief among coastal tribes that lived long before written language existed. They believed that the sea was not merely a deep, endless expanse, but the body of something that had once been alive and still dreamed. To them, the ocean's currents were its breath, the tides its heartbeat, and the shimmering light beneath the moon was its occasional glance toward the world above. In their mythology, at the quietest depth of the Primordial Ocean lay a city that had never truly sunk. That city was called by many names, depending on who spoke of it. In the southern islands, it was known as Numaha. In the northern continents, Seraphion. On the tropical waters, Aramith, the city without dusk. All versions told the same story, that beneath the waves lived a civilization that refused to die, breathing calmly within the eternal blue. According to the old tales, the city was built not from stone or metal, but from the fossilized shells of marine organisms that glowed softly from within. Its walls were as transparent as pearls, reflecting a pale light from the ocean floor. Its streets spiraled like whirlpools. And at the center stood a tower that did not rise toward the sky, but descended into the earth below. The inhabitants were known as the Rememberers. They were not human as we are, but entities who safeguarded the world's memories before history began. They did not speak with sound, but through gentle vibrations in the water, sending messages from one mind to another, whispers only understood by those who had once lived under the pressure of the deep. Some modern scholars who study ancient sea myths have noticed an intriguing pattern in these stories. Nearly every version mentions that the city emerges to the surface once every 1,000 years. For only a few hours, on a night when the sea is as still as glass, 'tis said that those lucky or lost enough to witness it will see a silvery glow on the horizon, like a sinking star. Many sailors have claimed to witness it, particularly in the Indian and South Pacific Oceans. Yet every account ends the same way, with ships losing their course, clocks stopping, and consciousness fading as if time itself refuses to travel there. In several 17th century colonial archives, there is a record from a Portuguese navigator named Rodrigo Salas, who reported seeing a glowing city beneath the water, like stars submerged with towers that trembled softly. His account was dismissed at the time as hallucination from lack of oxygen. But modern analysis reveals that his recorded coordinates align precisely with one of the world's strongest magnetic anomalies. A place where compasses spin aimlessly and radio signals vanish once they cross its invisible boundary. Perhaps, as the legends claim, the city never truly sank. It simply shifted from a dimension that can be seen to one that can only be felt. The city waits patiently beneath layers of time, observing the changing world above, waiting for the moment when humanity becomes quiet enough to hear it again. The sea, with all its depths, was never really a grave. It is a living archive where everything lost waits to be remembered once more. Several years ago, a Japanese research diver named Arata Kubo recorded something that disturbed his peace of mind for the rest of his life. He was diving in an area locals called the Silent Sea, south of Okinawa, where the ocean currents barely moved even during storms. The depth there reached over 300 meters, and at a certain point, sunlight turned a deep green, like the color of rotting leaves. It was there that he saw something science could not explain, formed too orderly to be natural, yet too alien to be human-made. He described them as layered stone structures, neatly arranged like steps leading into darkness. In his private notes, Arata wrote that he felt watched. There were no sea creatures nearby, no bubble sounds from schools of fish, only a low hum coming from nowhere. As he approached the stone wall, he noticed a light pulsing slowly, like a heartbeat inside the rock. He thought it was the reflection of his equipment, but the pulse followed a rhythm unrelated to his movements. In an instant, his pressure gauge and compass both died. All needles froze, as if time itself refused to move forward there. When he resurfaced, his face was pale and his eyes vacant. He could not immediately explain what he saw. During a research conference months later, he only described it as an unknown structure with strange electromagnetic properties. After that, Arata never dived again. Some colleagues reported that he suffered from a peculiar auditory disturbance whenever he was near water, as if the sea itself whispered into his ears. Arata's discovery later caught the attention of archaeologists and geologists. They called the area the Yonaguni anomaly, a name that is now widely known. Over time, other divers reported similar experiences. Whenever someone stayed too long below a certain depth there, electronic devices would fail, the currents would subtly match their heartbeat, and some claimed to hear a sound like singing from the deep. It had no words, only long tones that bent and trembled underwater, deep enough to make one's chest bones resonate. There is one alleged audio recording from one of the expeditions. The captured sound was unlike whales or dolphins, but rather a harmony of interwoven tones, descending slowly, then cutting off into oppressive silence. When acoustic experts analyzed it, they found the frequencies repeating every 1,000 seconds perfectly, as though not a natural occurrence, but a message delivered in precise mathematical rhythm. For some, the phenomenon is a coincidence. But for those who believe in the legend of the underwater city, that sound is the breath of the rememberers, still guarding the edge of the world. They do not wish to be found, only remembered. The sound may be their way of ensuring that modern humans do not forget that something once lived down there, something that knows more about the Earth than all of recorded history combined. After that recording quietly circulated among diving communities, strange things began to happen to those who had listened to it more than once. One of them, a marine biologist named Miko Tanabe, claimed that several nights after hearing the sound, she began to dream of a city beneath the sea. It wasn't a ruined or coral-covered city, but one still alive, filled with tall structures glowing softly in greenish blue, as if made of breathing glass. Along every underwater street, she saw tall, pale figures moving slowly as if floating, their large eyes glowing faintly. They didn't speak, but Miko somehow understood their message. They had never left. The dream repeated every night for nearly a month, and each time she awoke, her hair was wet, as though she had just emerged from water. She checked her ceiling for leaks, but found none. When she tried to write down her dream, the ink on the paper always spread, as if touched by drops of salt water. She began to feel that something from the sea had followed her home. The phenomenon didn't stop with her. Other divers who had also listened to the recording reported similar experiences, recurring dreams of underwater cities, heaviness in their chests as if they were submerged, even the smell of salt in sealed rooms. One of them, a technical diver from Russia named Sergei Volkov, was reported to speak in an unknown language while asleep. According to his wife, his voice sounded like an echo from within a cavern, long, trembling, and haunting. Linguists who analyzed the sleep recordings found that the rhythm of his voice matched the frequency of the Yanaguni sound, one pulse every 1,000 seconds. There were no words, yet the pattern resembled an attempt at communication, as if someone or something was using the human body as an instrument to transmit messages from the sea. An unsettling theory began circulating among underground academics. That memory docin. T belongs solely to the brain, but also to the Earth itself. The ocean, with its pressure and currents, might store the echoes of events too ancient to be called history. If that were true, then those who dreamt weren't hallucinating. They were becoming mediums through which the sea remembered itself. Miko eventually stopped teaching and moved to a small fishing village in Haterama. Locals said that sometimes at night, when the waves were calm and the moon drifted between clouds, they could hear a soft singing from her room. Oh, sounding eerily like the one in the recording. No words, only a long, wavering tone, like the breath of a sleeping giant. A few months after the incident, the divers who experienced similar dreams began to find one another, even though they lived in different countries and spoke different languages. They met on an online forum originally meant for discussing marine archaeology. Without realizing it, they began describing almost identical things: long underwater streets illuminated by soft light, towers layered with blue stones that seemed to reflect time, and faint voices calling out names they had never heard before. Some of them described strange symbols that appeared on the city's walls, letters that seemed alive, vibrating and shifting like jellyfish in motion. One diver from Iceland, a woman named Freya, claimed that in her dream she walked through a vast hall filled with statues of humans with closed eyes. At the center of the hall was a round pool, reflecting a light from an unseen source. When she looked into the water, she didn't see her own reflection, but the faces of others who had shared the same dream. They all looked back at her from beneath the surface, as if through a mirror separating two realities. Miko Tanabe read her story and trembled, for she had seen the same thing. She began to believe that these dreams weren't personal, but fragments of something much larger subconscious network, linking humans through the memory of the ocean. She sent private messages to Freya, Sergei, and a few others. They agreed to conduct an experiment to sleep at the same hour under a specific tidal pattern, while the Yonaguni recording played softly in the background. That night, across different continents, 10 people listened to the same sound with their eyes closed and their minds open. They fell asleep slowly, and when they awoke the next morning, they all wrote the same thing. They had been in the same place. The underwater city was brighter now, bathed in cascading light from the sky, though there was no sun. They stood around the same circular pool, silently watching one another. No one could explain this scientifically, yet their recorded brainwave patterns showed extraordinary synchronization, as if the 10 of them had dreamed in one single rhythm, the heartbeat of the same being. Neuroscientists called it a case of collective subconscious resonance, though others believed it was something more. They suspected that the sea had used them to recreate an ancient form of communication, not through language, but through dreams woven from the Earth's memory itself. Miko wrote one last line in her journal before she vanished from record. Perhaps the sea does not want us to remember it. Perhaps it only wants to be heard. That sentence became the final entry before her notes ended forever. A few weeks after their final experiment, something began to unfold in the real world. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, several research vessels reported faint blue lights appearing on the seafloor, forming vast geometric patterns like a living city pulsing in darkness. Satellites detected weak energy emissions, not resembling any known biological phenomenon, but more like rhythmic pulses, a kind of breathing. No one could pinpoint the source, but the coordinates aligned with the Yonaguni region. Days later, Okinawa's shores experienced strange tides. The sea receded several meters before rising again, without any discernible pattern. The water left behind circular marks in the sand, spiral shapes identical to the symbols the divers had once seen in their dreams. In Reykjavik, Freya read the news and felt as if someone whispered directly into her ear. She closed her eyes and heard the faint echo of dripping water in a cave. Each night since the experiment, she dreamed the same dream standing inside the hall of the submerged city. Now brighter, with faint figures in the distance that looked like humans, yet moved too slowly, like shadows resisting time itself. The city seemed aware now, as though a sleeping creature were awakening after millennia of silence. In Tokyo, Miko, who could no longer sleep deeply, began hearing a low-frequency hum inside her skull, similar to a sonar pulse. When she recorded it, the waveform matched the deep-sea pulses recently discovered by scientists. It was as if her mind was directly linked to the vibrations rising from beneath the earth. Miko wrote in her notes that perhaps the sea was not a place, but memory itself and humans were sparks that occasionally remembered their dream. Researchers investigated the phenomenon, including marine physicists and paleohistorians. They found a small geological anomaly near Yonaguni-on area dense with quartz crystal. Quartz, known for its ability to store and transmit energy, might be the key to the Earth's memory trapped under the sea. When geomagnetic energy surged, those memories could open, releasing glimpses of the past through dreams or resonant sound. Yet not everyone accepted the scientific explanation. Some believed the city was the body of an ancient living being beneath the waves, and the dreamers were merely fragments of its sleeping mind. On the seventh night after the blue light reports, a fisherman off southern Okinawa claimed to have seen something strange in the sea's silvery dome rising among the waves, glowing under the moon. As he approached, the structure dissolved like mist, leaving behind an unfamiliar salty scent, as if ancient air had just been released. He returned to shore with no evidence, but the next morning, on the sand where his boat was moored, there was a perfect circular marquise, though someone or something had stood there all night. The phenomenon spread. From Australia to Peru, reports of blue light appeared one after another. The pattern was always the same, emerging minutes before midnight, moving slowly beneath the waves, then fading without trace. No explanation sufficed, no human marker existed, and no satellite or submersible could approach too closely. It was as if the ocean guarded its secret, showing itself only long enough to be remembered, before sinking again into its endless dark. Months after the waves of blue light faded, the world seemed calm again, though something in the air felt altered. Across the globe, the oceans began to behave strangely. They no longer rose and fell according to gravity alone, but breath-rising and sinking with a rhythm of their own. Scientists recorded wave patterns that didn't follow the wind, but responded to a frequency too low for human ears. In an underwater lab near the Mariana Trench, seismographs captured subtle vibrations repeating every 8 hours steady, persistent, like a heartbeat. Researchers called it the pulse of the sea. No one knew what it meant. Yet those attuned to it, like Miko and Freya, felt the pulse as a callsome thing from the deep past trying to speak. On certain nights, especially under the full moon, the sea began to hum softly. Freya once heard it on an Icelandic shore, standing alone by the water. The sound didn't come from wind or tide, but from within the sea itself. It wasn't human speech or music, but a long vibration that echoed through her chest, making every cell of her body tremble gently. She tried to record it, but the results showed nothing a flat line, as if no instrument could perceive a frequency that shouldn't exist. In that silence, she felt she was hearing something older than history, perhaps older than time itself. Meanwhile, in the depths of the Indian Ocean, military divers reported similar experiences. They heard a sound like a breath drawn from every direction at once. One diver claimed that, at a certain depth, he felt his body breathing with the sea, as if his lungs were no longer his own. When he resurfaced, he wept without knowing why. He said it felt like leaving behind something that had once been part of him, something he'd known long before he was born. The phenomenon led some scientists to revisit an old, discarded hypothesis that the ocean is not merely a body of salt water, but a slow consciousness, living on a timescale utterly alien to ours. If human time is measured in hours and days, oceanic time might be measured in millennia for a single breath. On that scale, every storm is a brief sigh, every tide a blink. Perhaps the lost cities beneath the sea were never ruins, but organs of a sleeping being. In the years that followed, global weather patterns began to change. Storms appeared in calm regions but caused no destruction. They spun in perfect spirals, too symmetrical to be random. At the center of each, the sea glowed faintly blue, like a breath released. People began calling them signs of the sea's awareness. Some were afraid, some in awe, and a few felt as though the world was awakening from a long sleep, carrying a message yet to be understood. On quiet nights, those who stood by the shore and closed their eyes long enough could sometimes feel something, not a sound or a word, but a soft sensation in the chest, as if another heartbeat had joined their own. The sea seemed to wait patient, unthreatening only, wishing to be remembered. In that long pause, the world felt ancient and young at once, and humankind seemed for a moment to be part of a larger mind that remembered everything. Long after the laboratories ceased their research and the media moved on, the sea kept breathing. It was no longer a mystery to be solved, but a quiet part of daily life facted, like the air itself. Along forgotten shores, elders began teaching their children to bow before stepping into the water, not out of fear, but respect. Each time a wave touched their feet, they felt a strange warmth, as if something ancient recognized them. The world, once frantic and loud, grew slower, as though all living things were quietly learning to listen again. Miko and Freya, once seekers of scientific proof, now lived in a small cottage by the northern sea. They no longer recorded data or measured frequencies. Each morning, they simply sat in silence, watching sunlight dance upon the water, hearing the gentle pulse that now matched the rhythm of their own breath. The sound no longer felt alien. Sometimes they spoke without words. Through glances, knowing the sea replied with the calm movement of its waves. In that long stillness, they understood that humanity had never truly left the ocean. Perhaps all memories of origin, of stars, of stone, of water were never lost, merely asleep within us. On the final night of winter, the sky above the sea shimmered once more with the same blue light as before, though now without storm or noise. It moved slowly, like the long breath of a world remembering itself. Freya watched it for a long time and whispered, almost inaudibly, "Maybe this isn't a beginning or an ending, Miko. Maybe it's just the world finally remembering who it is." Miko smiled faintly, gazing at the still sea. He knew that somewhere deep below, something ancient was opening its eyes, not to frighten, not to destroy, but to share the memory it had carried for ages. The blue light faded. A sacred silence remained. The sea seemed endless, the air above it trembling softly with the scent of salt, rain, and something nameless, perhaps nostalgia. In that silence, the world felt balanced once more. There was no border between land and ocean, between humankind and the ancient memory that birthed them. Everything breathed together, in one rhythm, one consciousness, slowly calming itself. And from nowhere, a faint voice could be heard, not from the wind or the waves, but from within every living being, a whisper that said, "I am still here."